this blueberry for fresh market. Lisa.
Great, thank you for the introduction. Just a quick check that my slides are visible. All right, well, as Zach mentioned, my title presentation is From Bush to Clamshell, How to Machine Harvest Blueberry for Our Fresh Market. Before I go any further, I'd just like to acknowledge that the information that you are going to be hearing about is the result of trials and experience in the Pacific Northwest using northern high bush blueberry cultivars. So if you are using southern high bush or rabbit eye, some of the information might not directly translate. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the co-investigators that are very instrumental in the execution of the work that you'll be hearing about today. They include graduate student Yashin Kai. We also have Dr. Jinru Chen with the University of Georgia, Dr. Fumi Takeda, USDA ARS research scientist, Dr. Wei Yang with Oregon State University, and then the Oxbow team, who have been collaborators and partners with the machine harvesting work that I'll be presenting on. Also, I'd like to acknowledge funding provided by the Washington Blueberry Commission and the Washington State Department of Agriculture. So even though we're in the Northwest and we are working with northern high bush blueberry cultivars, the challenges of harvesting blueberries for fresh market are experienced nationally and globally. So fresh market blueberries are traditionally harvested by hand in order to achieve high fruit quality for fresh market. However, with the rising cost of labor, decreasing worker availability, as well as competition from other operations for a limited labor pool, there's a lot of challenges when it comes to finding adequate labor and cost-effective labor to harvest blueberries for fresh market. Layered on top of that, this year was COVID, where now we have to be faced with staggering workers within the field and physical distancing to ensure safety. So this brings another dimension when it comes to machine harvesting for fresh, or emphasizing the importance of machine harvesting for fresh as a means to try to efficiently harvest blueberries for fresh market. And mechanization has certainly been offered as a solution for the labor challenges. And with COVID, we have seen more operations here in the Northwest switch over to mechanization in order to try to mitigate some of the challenges. So machine harvesting for fresh market is an area that there have been research projects on very early on. My introduction to this topic was in 2014 when I was brought on to a project that was led by Dr. Charlie Lee with the University of Georgia. You can see Dr. Lee in the image on the left where he's holding a berry impact recording device. This device was used for many research projects, and it allowed us to determine where along the harvesting line where we experience maximum impact, because with that knowledge we can leverage it and focus on intervention strategies to reduce bruising. Reflecting back, this project started in 2014, and the initial design is what you see in the center, where we had this handheld shakers that were pneumatically powered that would be tethered onto these mobile platforms with soft catching surfaces installed within that. That design was certainly tested and experimented with, but several years later down the road, and as we concluded that project and moved on to different projects, we are working with these self-propelled over-the-row machine harvesters with modifications intended to allow us to harvest blueberries for fresh market with high fruit quality. Here in the Northwest, we've been doing work for the past 2 years using a machine that has this particular design. This is, again, an Oxbow harvester design. This is an Oxbow 7440. It has these over-rotor picking heads in it. The key design that allows us to harvest for fresh market, or was of most interest to us from a research perspective and impacts on fruit quality, was the soft catch material that was within the machine, specifically the catching plates, which rather than a standard polycarbonate material, we had this elastomeric polymer that was installed in order to reduce bruising impact. And then we had suspended above the catching plates in the conveyor belt, as well as other areas within the machine, this soft catch material. This material was designed, again, to mitigate the bruising as the detached berries fell onto different surfaces in the machine. And in some of our drop tests that we've done in our lab, and you see Yashin doing, we do see that this softer material does reduce bruising when dropped at various heights. So the objectives of our work in 2019 and 2020 were as follows. One was to continue on with evaluating harvest efficiency and the resultant fruit quality. Again, in northern highbush blueberry cultivars using the modified over-the-row harvester prototype, which was engineered with Oxbow, and to compare it to standard hand harvesting and then traditional over-the-row harvesting without the soft catching material installed in the machine. And then secondly, we wanted to look more at the optimal blueberry harvest interval that are important for some of the cultivars that are in our region in order to be able to help maximize fruit quality and harvest efficiency. So I'm just going to be showing a little bit of data from those projects in order to kind of give you a sense of our general take-home messages. For the first objective, where we looked at machine harvest comparison, the overall conclusion for our work was that the modified over-the-row harvester with the soft catching material resulted in fruit quality that was intermediate between standard over-the-row harvesting and hand harvesting. And we did not see any losses in efficiency or selectivity in these machines when we trialed it on conventional farms or commercial farms here in the Northwest. So what you're looking at, the figure on the left, is a table where we're looking at a second pick Duke field and we're looking at pack-out data. You'll see we have the machine harvest control, that's again a standard over-the-row machine harvester, and we're comparing it to the modified over-the-row harvester and hand harvest. And so you'll see when it came to pack-out, the modified over-the-row harvester had pack-out that was statistically the same as the hand harvest, and it was better than the machine control. And then we look at our color and soft sort outs. You'll see that with color, we didn't see any differences with color sort outs, but for softs, the softs were intermediate between the standard over-the-row machine and the hand harvest. On the right, we're looking at firmness of the berries immediately after harvesting on day one, and then every week all the way for 28-day period. And you'll see with a machine control, those are the blue bars, we had lower firmness compared to hand, and again, the modified over-the-row harvester was intermediate. Now let's look at objective 2. This was, again, our harvest interval objective. What we're looking at here, the figure on the left, is our pack-out data. And what you'll be seeing is we have our first harvest. This is our baseline harvest that sets the interval. And then we harvested Liberty at 3-day interval, a 10-day interval, and a 14-day interval. And you'll see we looked at whether or not there were differences in a harvest interval or our harvest type. The key takeaway that I want to focus on is that our 3-day interval, which you'll see here, had a almost 21% color sort out. So that interval was too short, and we looked at the quality of the fruit that did get packed out. The acidity was rather high and the overall quality was reduced. And so for Liberty in the Northwest, we concluded that a 3-day interval is too tight of an interval for good fruit quality. And we saw this particularly for machine, but we also saw it in our quality data for hand harvested berries as well. So over 2 years of this particular experiment, we saw that the 10-day to 11-day interval was optimal for maintaining quality. And shorter intervals, we saw reduced quality, and also there's the economic consideration of having your picking crew go through that frequently as well. It is a cost. Now, having an adequate machine harvester that can harvest blueberry for fresh market is certainly important, but it's not the only factor. And so the rest of the presentation will focus on some of the other key elements that need to be in play in order to harvest blueberry for fresh market and achieve high quality. And so I'll begin and talk about field conditions such as sanitation, maintaining pest and disease management, pruning and training and trellising systems, harvest timing and interval, as well as harvest operator settings, and then also the important considerations that happen outside of the field, such as in the packing house with the sorters and storage as well. Now, it's important that at the very beginning, you're harvesting a good cultivar that can be successfully harvested by machine. So with a cultivar that is good for machine harvesting, you're looking at fruit that is firm, that has adequate texture and resistance to bruising. Also, having a cultivar with good exposed clusters, a narrow crown and upright habit are also good in order to get a good fit of the machine around the base of the plant, which will reduce ground loss. Other important attributes include concentrated ripening. That'll minimize potential greens that can come off the machine if you have more of an extended harvesting window of time. Certainly, you want to be looking at other attributes like timing of production and how it fits into market windows that you might want to be targeting. Storability is another important characteristic. We see quite a few differences regardless of harvesting system in storability among cultivars. A lot of this is attributed to how rapidly a cultivar loses water or experiences water loss. And then, of course, adaptability for your region and your production system is important as well. Now, machine harvesting for fresh market is a breeding target among many blueberry breeding programs. And I'm excited to share that with the new Vaccinium Coordinated Agricultural Project, there is a resurgence in effort nationally and internationally to look at key characteristics and markers for breeding blueberry for machine harvestability traits. Now let's go and talk more about the field conditions that need to be considered when harvesting for fresh market by machine. Now, many of us are aware we need to make sure that we're managing pests and diseases and birds as well in order to reduce yield loss. However, in a machine harvesting situation, when you don't have the opportunity to be as selective as a hand picker, it's very important to make sure that your fruit are sound. I've seen a couple of instances where disease management or bird management isn't as good as it could be or should be. And we have fruit that all of a sudden is leaking into our harvesting flats, and even the sound fruit are getting contaminated with juice on the surface of the fruit. So this opens up the opportunity for having decay losses and a larger proportion of the fruit because of the juice that is on the surface of the fruit. So it's really important to make sure that pest and disease management is adequately done for machine harvesting for fresh. Weeds also need to be managed well, and this is really important in situations where you want to ensure that you have a good fit of the catcher plates around the base of the plant. If not, the weeds can certainly complicate the fit of the machine around the plants. If you're in a situation like this organic blueberry producer that we're looking at the picture here on the left, and the weeds have gotten away from you, simply considering a mowing before harvest can help reduce some of the weeds that, again, can kind of interfere with getting a good fit of the machine and good harvest from the field. Also important are pruning and training conditions. You certainly want to make sure that you're pruning for a machine harvest situation. And what that entails is you want to make sure that that crown, which you'll see in the picture on the left, is narrow. That again ensures that you have a good fit of those catcher plates around the base of your plant. If you don't have a good fit, there's gaps and holes, and that can result in fruit dropping through the catcher plates and onto the ground, and that is a yield loss. And that ground loss can really be minimized with a good management system when it comes to your pruning. In addition, having a good trellising system is important. Any cultivars or any branches that are hanging low are increased likelihood of dropping fruit. So trellising the plant upwards really can help you ensure that the fruit is getting into that tunnel, the plant is getting into the tunnel machine and getting harvested. Raised beds can also help. We see up to a 20 to 25% difference in terms of ground loss, or reduction in ground loss when we have raised beds versus flat. Timing is another really important aspect to consider. It certainly is a balancing act as well. So when you don't necessarily want to pick too soon, because that is certainly expensive, even in a machine harvesting situation. However, you don't want to pick too late either, because then you're risking having too much soft fruit in your field that might need to be sorted out or will have reduced storability. One tactic that has worked really well in many operations is to handpick the first fruit. And that way you'll be getting some of the larger fruit that's firm before it has had the chance to soften, and then move in with your machine harvester and pick for fresh. You also want to make sure that you're picking your fruit when it's dry or after the dew has evaporated. Having that moisture on the fruit can again reduce storability, quality, and shelf life, particularly if you're losing that bloom on the fruit. In our operations, when we're looking at northern highbush blueberry cultivars, I generally recommend that you want to start thinking about machine picking when it's 50 to 60% blue or less. What we've seen in our trials is if you go over that, you're risking having too much soft fruit that is overly mature and drops easily, or is not going to be storing as well, or might get sorted out on your sorting line as well. You want to make sure that you're picking early, just like you would in a hand situation as well, and avoid that heat during the day. And then going back to the interval selection, you want to make sure that you're picking in an interval that optimizes on quality. Now, having a good harvest operator cannot be understated as well. So it's really important to have an operator that knows what he or she is doing, that they're trained to operate the machine and to get it centered onto the row, adjusted the height accordingly to minimize ground loss and damage. They also know how to operate the beater speed and the amplitude and get a good ground speed and that adequate gap between the picking heads so that you're minimizing ground loss and damage to the plants and getting good quality. Now, we've done a little bit of work too looking at harvest operation settings to see what kind of difference they can have on the resultant quality of the fruit. And that is some of the data that we're looking at here, where we're looking at first pick Draper up here in northwestern Washington, picked in 2018. So you see we had 3 treatments in this situation that varied in head speed and ground speed, and then we compared that to hand. What you'll see overall, we had a very good pack out. All of the fruit that we picked by machine had a pack out greater than 90%. But when we looked at firmness, you'll see highlighted that the hand harvested fruit had much higher firmness. But what I wanted to point out with the firmness data, as well as the percent bruising data that you see on the far right, is that by varying the head speed and the ground speed, we saw differences in firmness, and we certainly saw differences in bruising as well. So again, having a good operator who can get the machine operating optimally and also is paying attention to fruit quality is going to really help set you up for getting high quality fruit from your machine when you're picking for fresh. And here's an example of some of the fruit that we harvested by machine. Again, very good pack out. We were very pleased with the quality. And again, by modifying some of the settings, we could get pretty big differences in our fruit quality characteristics as well. In the interest of time, I'm not going to be presenting these data, but these data highlight the same aspect where modifying variables like, in this case, head speed, ground speed, and head gap, we see quite a bit of difference in pack out as well as our quality indicators. So once the fruit is off the plant, the challenge of trying to get good quality fruit doesn't end there when you're picking by machine. Just as you would in a hand pick situation, you want to make sure that you're working to cool that fruit quickly and to remove that field heat or avoid that field heat. If you're in a situation where the fruit has to stay out in the field longer than desirable, you want to think about covering it or putting it in the shade. I'm really excited to hear what some researchers in Canada are going to discover. They are looking at reflective cover so that the fruit can be covered and reduce some of the radiation that the fruit might receive. That might be certainly useful moving forward in fruit that just simply has to stay out in the field longer. The key takeaway is don't let that fruit sit out longer than it has to. Unfortunately, I've seen this situation a couple times in machine harvest situations, and the fruit essentially just cooks and softens pretty rapidly in the heat of the day. So cool it quickly. If you have the capability, consider getting a refrigerated truck and or getting a forced air cooling system so you can bring that fruit temperature down as quickly as possible. And harvesting early in the morning and avoiding the heat of the day can certainly help with this as well. This next one, harvest size container size and compression is something that is pertinent both in hand pick situations as well as in machine pick situations. The key is that you want to look at minimizing compression, and you can do that by using shallow flats like the one that you see in the right. The one that you see in the center as well as the left, which came from a field that was hand picked, the fruit that were in these containers were stacked quite deeply. From observation and some of the data that we've collected, if the fruit stacked greater than 6 inches, the fruit on the bottom gets compressed, and all of a sudden we're having issues with softening and leaking in some situations with some of our thinner skin cultivars because of compression. So something to pay attention to, and try to go with those shallower flats when you can. Also minimize the number of drops, drop heights, and rolling throughout the machine harvesting process and all the way to your packing plant and into that final clamshell. Now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the packing shed. Really, I think the key moving forward in getting good quality fruit from machine harvested fruit that's destined for fresh market lies in also having good sorters that are designed to sort out the bad fruit and maintain the good fruit. There's a lot of advancement with this technology. That technology is great to have, and it's been exciting to see coming into our packing plants here in the Northwest, but you also want to make sure that the operators know how to operate it successfully so that you're getting the outcome that you've invested in it. Number of sorters is another aspect to consider. You can use 2 or 3 or even more sorters in order to get a higher pack or remove more of the fruit that you don't necessarily want in your final clamshell. When you're designing your packing line, you want to be thinking about drop height. I'd say anything greater than 6 inches is where we start to see cause for concern from bruising. Padding and sanitation are issues that go hand in hand. Padding can reduce some of the impact force from large drop heights, but when you have the softer surfaces or padding, you also have a situation where you need to think carefully about how you're going to sanitize it, because those softer surfaces do form biofilms more rapidly and are harder to clean. When you're thinking about your sorting and your packing line, you also want to make sure that you're designing it and you're adjusting it according to your cultivar and the timing that it's being harvested in your market. And then the fact of the matter might simply be too, is that if we're moving more and more to harvesting fresh market fruit by machines, we just might need to be having to cull more fruit in order to get a higher quality fruit in our clamshell. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the work that Dr. Jen Chen has done here in the Northwest and elsewhere, and this pertains to food safety. So soft surfaces and padding are more likely to form biofilms, and these biofilms increase the potential of having foodborne illness that could potentially contaminate our fruit. And these biofilms do form within hours. So it's important to make sure that the machine, the packing line, your harvesting containers are sanitized. Some of the work that Dr. Chen has shown that water alone is not effective or not as effective as chlorine, peracetic acid, or mixtures with ethanol and isopropanol. So make sure that you're, again, sanitizing and you're cleaning regularly. And unfortunately, we see many situations where the machine isn't as clean as it really should be, or the lugs as well. So make sure that you're following through and practicing good food safety and sanitizing. As I wrap up, I want to talk about the storage environment as well, because having good post-harvest storage is kind of that end piece to making sure that the final product that you harvest is going to be of high quality and reach a consumer in a good condition to encourage repeat buying. So the goal with having storage is to reduce the decay, the physiological breakdown, abuse, and dehydration of your fruit. For blueberry, we're looking at having our temperatures at 32 to 34 degrees Fahrenheit and a high relative humidity to reduce water loss. I'd say anything from 95% or above is around the relative humidity ranges we want to be targeting for blueberry species. There's more advances in controlled and modified atmosphere storage. That's an exciting area to look at, including some of the modified packaging that you see on the lower right, where we can adjust the CO2 and the O2 concentrations. For high bush blueberry, 10 to 12% CO2 and 1 to 2% oxygen can really help, particularly in export situations or in storage situations where you want to get that longevity and good quality. There has been work on UV light, ozone, and fumigation with sulfur dioxide to reduce decay. Some of those results are pretty inconsistent, but it's something to stay abreast of because we might be having more technologies to ensure good storage conditions and good quality. And of course, make sure that you're paying attention to cultivar and making adjustments accordingly. So I'd like to revisit the slide again and just underscore that machine harvesting for fresh market does rely on having a good harvester, but it's not the only piece of the puzzle. You want to, again, make sure that there are good field management practices being undertaken to ensure that the fruit on the bush is of high quality, and you're going to be optimizing on your chance of having a good pack out. That relies on good pruning, trellising, considering using raised beds in machine harvesting situations, practicing good sanitation, picking a good harvest time and interval. Again, making sure you have a good harvest operator on your machine and crew, and it's adjusted according to the cultivar and the field and the situation that is unique for that environment. And then also you're having good sorters and packers and good storage conditions as well. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to answering questions.